We're going to help each other. The United States is in a very strong position militarily. We have the best equipment anywhere in the world. You're buying a lot of that equipment, actually, and I think we're going to see some of it in action tomorrow. I just want to thank you for the friendship, for the long-time friendship.
US President Donald Trump's historic trip to the Gulf has now come to an end. He returned to the Gulf for his first official trip in his second term, but this time it wasn't just about geopolitics. It included big business deals. The US has racked up billions of dollars in deals, from tech partnerships in Saudi Arabia to a record aviation deal in Qatar to commercial investments with the UAE. Trump's Gulf tour was mainly a week of mega announcements, including $200 billion in new US-UAE investments, a $600 billion package with Saudi Arabia, and a record-setting aircraft order from Qatar Airways. Trump's tour had the capacity to rechart the courses of US relationships in the Middle East, with business deals seemingly taking on a new role as the core of diplomacy. This is Business Extra from the National News. I'm your host, Sarah Forster, in This Week for Salima Said. It's Friday afternoon in Abu Dhabi. Trump has just concluded his visit. With us today is Manus Cranny, the National's geo-economics editor. He was on the ground in Riyadh and Abu Dhabi following these deals as they were announced. Manus, thank you for coming on.
Sarah, good day.
So how should we read this visit overall? Is it primarily a business mission in the immediate sense, or is it maybe more of a long-term strategy?
I think when you break it down, this was Trump at its best, playing to an American audience for the deal flow and to the Middle East order in terms of I'm here, America's here, we're very, very present. Now, I think where we begin to unpick this is between the transaction, the headline deals that were done, with foreign policy, which was very much at the core of this trip. But this, for me, Sarah, is very much about, if you kind of think about it, arrested development, moving to accelerated engagement or partnership, which is the phrases that are being used here in the UAE. So it's that kind of delay mechanism under the Biden administration, which was going to slow down the flow of chips and technology, not just to this region, but globally. And here we are, and it's a ripping off of that Band-Aid.
So how should we interpret the scale and timing of these investments? Some of these are being considered historic deals. Why is that?
It depends which superlative you want to go for. I think yesterday we were talking about big, bigger, and biggest. And that's whether you talk about the security deals that were signed in Saudi Arabia, the airline deals that were signed in Qatar, and here in the UAE, it was almost like a layering on top of what was already committed, a $1.4 trillion overall economic package from here in the UAE, and another $200 billion signed here. But I think it is very much a process of building, regardless of who's in that White House, right? So regardless of, it could be another Trump administration, it could be J.D. Vance, we don't know. It could be another Democrat sitting in the White House. So this is very much about long-term economic engagement, which gets you over the machinations of U.S. politics. Because as you and I know, and we've worked through a lot of these campaigns, it can change on a dime.
It can. Now, it's clearly obvious to everyone that business deals were top headline making during this trip, but diplomacy was also key. How do you see both of those sides of the visit coming together?
I think when you listen to the three speeches, and you and I have just finished listening to the third major set piece from Donald Trump here in the UAE, interesting, Sarah, that speech was one of the shortest. Probably because he's at the end of the trip and he's on his way back to the United States of America. But I think I want to take your mind back to the start of the week to Saudi Arabia. That's where the real headline piece of foreign policy, I think, came for me. The dawn of a bright new day for the region. Export tech, not terrorism. And there was a very historical and a standing ovation. I was in the room. There was a standing ovation when the President, Donald Trump, actually said that he was removing sanctions on Syria. And this is critically important. This went on then for another piece the following day where he shook hands with Ahmed al-Shara, the interim president of Syria. So it's deals, but it is very clear foreign policy. He's prepared to take big chances publicly on shaking hands with al-Shara and at the same time offering Iran, come to the table, do a deal. And if you don't do a deal, and this is the sting, if you don't do a deal, I will bring massive maximum pressure on you. So there were various really important foreign policy points made.
So if I were to ask you, what did the US want out of this trip? What did it get from each stop?
The US wanted deals. They wanted headline deals that they can say to the US and say to the market and say to his mega base, I have secured $142 billion worth of arms deals with Saudi Arabia, the largest defense sales agreement in their history, whether it's in air, space, missiles, maritime, or IT. He then went on, of course, to Qatar, where he signed one of the biggest airline deals ever. And here in the UAE, adding to that narrative another $200 billion of deals. So this is going back to the United States to be able to say to the electorate and to Congress, I went, I solidified relationships, and I came home with a lot of economic value for the United States of America. So this is about saying, I changed the narrative relative to the Biden administration. Those were his words in that press conference, and you and I just left. He's throwing around numbers like 12 trillion and 13 trillion of economic value. As you and I both know, there's a great distance between what is promised, executed, and delivered and translated into real jobs and real value. But this is a big ticket deal, this trip.
That's very true. Now, on Thursday night, the US announced major commercial investments with the UAE worth $200 billion. Now, under this deal, Etihad Airways will be equipped with 28 American-made 787 and 777X planes from the US plane maker Boeing, as well as investments in AI and technology. This ties into long-term strategy. How do these deals serve dual economic and diplomatic purposes for both sides?
Think AI. Think of the piece of theatre that we saw, which was Donald Trump and the leadership here in the UAE pressing a button, and out of the system came this model of a 25-kilometer AI, almost like a super city. That, in essence, is about the elevation of the United Arab Emirates on the AI stage, leveling up and almost being seen as an equitable player, an equitable, prominent player relative to the United States and relative to China in the AI field. And that is what the leadership in the UAE want. And that is also, I would say, deals for the likes of NVIDIA, the likes of AMD and Oracle. So it's that symbiotic relationship between technology from the United States of America delivered into the UAE and the rest of the region, delivering economic value back to the US. But here's the important sort of geopolitical piece, which is we trust you with our tech. You can have our tech, you can have our most advanced chips, which the Biden administration was going to make a little bit more difficult, but we trust you, you can have it, you can grow, so long as you grow with us and you put investment back into the US in terms of AI data centers as well. That's why I'm calling it a symbiotic geopolitical deal. A bit of a mouthful, but it is what it is.
Let's turn briefly just to the Qatar Airways Boeing deal. The Qatar meeting appeared commerce-driven, with the historic Qatar Airways Boeing deal front and center. What does that say about the agenda of this trip? Is the nature of US-Qatar ties changing?
I think it's solidifying, would be the word that I would use for Qatar. But the QIA, the Qatar Investment Authority, again, we go back to these sovereign wealth funds. They are the alpha of the relationships, whether it's the PIF, the QIA, the likes of Mubadala, along with various other entities here in the UAE. But the QIA to deliver $500 billion of investment into the United States over the next 10 years. And there's no doubt about it. The Boeing order stole the headlines, didn't it? 210 jets. I mean, it really was not a lifeline for Kelly Ortberg, but it's certainly a help along the way in that Boeing has had such a tough year in terms of deliveries, regulation, management changes, and a number of other fronts. But that's how I would characterize that, Sarah. And the FT wrote a really great piece. Let me just give you some stats there. The commitment from Qatar is the equivalent of 213 years of US Qatari economy, $386,000 per person, and 542% of the Qatari GDP. So they're up there in terms of ambition and delivery. That's the gap.
So Manus, you've tracked Donald Trump over the last 4 days throughout his entire trip to the Gulf. What's your takeaway?
The Gulf remains in the sphere of influence of the United States of America, and this is critically important. Spheres of influence, we spent a lot of time talking about North America, South America, and what President Trump wants to achieve. But this was a very clear geopolitical message to the Gulf states. You are inside the sphere of influence. I want you close to the heart of the United States. You will have a grand security bargain. The quid pro quo is, I want deals. That deal flow was cemented from the Gulf with intention and MOUs. But anybody that thinks that Saudi, Qatar, and the UAE and the broader region are outside a sphere of influence that Donald Trump wants to retain is mistaken. I would also say Howard Lutnick, Elon Musk, the President of the United States, the rest of the entourage. I'll just leave you with this. I'm not a body language expert, but I will say this to you. Their performance on stage, on air, in public is very different here in the Gulf than the past year and a half that I have observed in the United States of America, especially when you go to visit Donald Trump and this administration in the White House relative to how they performed, behaved, and engaged here in the Gulf.
Read into that what you will. Thank you so much, Manus.
Sarah, thank you.
From defence deals to tech-forward investments in artificial intelligence, Donald Trump's 2025 Gulf tour was more than just a diplomatic headline. As the region doubles down on its global partnerships and the US eyes deeper economic influence, one thing is clear: business is now central to diplomacy. That's it for this episode of Business Extra. I've been your host, Sarah Forster. Thanks for listening.